You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. I am Chris Spangle, and this is a special series called The Swamp Explained. And I am joined by Rob Quartel, a 45-year fly on the wall in Washington, D.C. Rob has worked for Republican presidential campaigns, government agencies like the EPA, and has been confirmed by the Senate to the U.S. Federal Maritime Commission. And he's also been a candidate for Congress and Senate. He's also spent years working in the private technology sector, working with startup companies. And given his experience and iconoclastic viewpoints, Rob gives us a great insight into the swamp that makes up our nation's capital. It is so great to see you, Rob. We have, I think I will begin with WTF.
By the way, I'll begin with Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Yes. But you know, this is, well, we're talking about a lot of things going on, obviously. The insurrection, the impeachment, the this, the that, it's totally amazing. And I'm sitting here realizing I'm smiling thinking about it all, even though it's totally appalling.
I haven't been smiling at all. It's hit me emotionally pretty hard. I mean, it's been sort of just a crazy, crazy week thinking that there may be more violence ahead. That's the part that's, I think, the heaviest.
I agree in terms of, I mean, as an actual fact. But, you know, I think, well, you can explain it with all sorts of theories. I'm sure Trump will be explaining it with it was the bad boys. And now, of course, QAnon is saying it's Antifa and so on and so forth. It's not really Trump supporters. They would never do this. And, it is at its core, it's probably more an example of a mob run wild, but it is shocking nonetheless. And there will be a lot of heads to roll on this, including the Capitol Police. Who, by all accounts, probably knew this was some version of this would happen for months and months. It's a 2,000 man and woman force. And I was talking to my wife about it yesterday, and she was saying, I just have a hard time envisioning any of those people pulling a gun or defending anyone. You see them at the entrance to all the buildings, and they're just sort of, they don't strike me as, police-like.
Well, so I read an article last night about all this, and the Washington Post did a really deep dive into what happened before. Right. And the Capitol Police kind of said, the head, I think her name is Sund, she said, he or she, I apologize. But
it was a he.
He basically, it's all under control. It's all under control. And everybody was just, because on the Capitol, it's the Capitol Police have the jurisdiction there, and nobody can come on their property without being invited on. And it wasn't until the Capitol was breached that the Sergeant at Arms finally went and invited the National Guard and agencies, but it took hours for them to all scramble. And the Capitol Police, obviously you had one injury, and that particular officer Sicknick, was knocked unconscious with a fire extinguisher, and then the crowd, the crowd continued to hit him. They're holding American flags, like they're beating him while he's on the ground dead. And then, you had the officer who, the Senate. I mean, this video of it is, this guy is heroic. Basically,
there was the backdrop. Some of the backdrop to this is that they were planning for a big crowd, and Muriel Bowser, who's the mayor of D.C. and who is, she's pretty savvy. She had decided, and she said this in public, that said it in advance. The D.C. police would not be carrying weapons, and she had asked for 200 National Guard, and that they not carry weapons. They were very cognizant of the optics of having the weapons on the Black Lives Matter and other protests, and how some of that potentially went awry. So they really didn't want D.C. to look like an armed city. And then, of course, once all this started, and the crowd got out of control, it wasn't random that it got out of control, as we well know. You have Trump and I've forgotten the congressman's name from, I think he's from Texas, and then
Cruz.
Yep, right.
Hawley.
Giuliani. Well, Cruz and Hawley weren't at that rally at the White House, to my knowledge.
Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah, it was these other guys. And they were, remember Giuliani was cheering them on with sort of mano a mano. We should have a, hand-to-hand face-off. And Trump was, I'm going to be right there with you walking down. Kind of
we played audio of Don Jr.'s speech. I mean, we're going to fight. We're going to be in your backyard. We need to fight like the left fights. I mean, well, I think what people need to understand is the psychology of the people that were there. And we talked in the last episode of the Chris Spangle show we talked to two people who were there who were just flat out shocked by what happened and were horrified and didn't expect it. And they said, most people were there for the fun atmosphere of the rally, but then there was this violent element that's in tactical gear, the militia guys. They're the ones to worry about. They're the ones
guy in the horns and headdress.
Yeah, right. And you hear that, and when you talk to these MAGA folks, especially the hardcore people, it's the demonization of the left. The left has become a supervillain that, they're part Thanos, part Borg. They're they've already taken over. They're about to take over the police and the military too. They're going to get you. They're going to get you. They're going to get you. Right. And then you've got Don Jr. standing there going, we need to fight like the left does. Let's fight, fight, fight. Now march down there.
Right.
It's
so
obvious
it's not surprising. But, that many people. But some 65 or 70% of Republicans still believe the election was stolen. Mm-hmm. And that's, I'm minded of Goebbels, who used to say before the Reich that one of his mottos was, if you repeat something often enough, it becomes a truth.
Yeah.
And that's really what's been going on. And 120 some Republican congressmen went down there and supported that argument. Many, like my own down here, said that, it was just to give people a voice. Well, they had a plenty voice, and they had it on November in the November election. And of course, the courts have denied all of the suits, and that was their voice.
Let's deal with that.
To deny the voice to 20 million others.
The never silent majority that never stops telling us what they think, that has their own information ecosystem, that has their own social networks. Like, their voice has not been silenced. They just lost. And now they're trying to silence, like you said, 20 million other people. Like, what? Yeah. You're not fighting you're fighting for hurt feelings of a president.
Yeah. Well, I thought Romney and Ben Sass and for once Mitch McConnell actually acquitted themselves really well. Mitch was a little late to that party, I would say, and of course his wife Elaine Chao resigned, also a little late to the party. And Betsy DeVos also late to the party, and the whole thing is, this is still unfolding. It's I think we can all figure out how it started, and everybody has a point of view as to whether Trump was deliberately inciting insurrection at the Capitol and the takeover, and there'll be arguments about that. And I think part of him just doesn't get the power of the word, never got the power of the language of the president, and of course now we have the Democrats going after impeachment, and people like Lisa Murkowski saying you should resign, and others telling Pence he should call the 25th Amendment in the cabinet and certify that he's a lunatic, and you have these arguments going on about he should do that so that he can be pardoned by Pence. I mean, this is just going wild. It's not over, and I feel in some ways sorry for Biden, because Biden, I think, genuinely would like to reboot, and he wants some focus on the agenda going ahead. And I know he's conflicted. And of course, if the Democratic Party has its way, he's going to be overwhelmed by all the Trump stuff through an impeachment. Whether he should be impeached or not, that's, these are the things that people have stopped acting like adults.
I'll push back on he doesn't understand the power of the presidency. I think January 26th.
The language.
The language, right. He's in Iowa. and he's giving a speech, and this is the infamous line, "I can go out on Fifth Avenue, shoot somebody." It's really incredible. I think he understood his power very early on, and I think a lot of us kind of, because we're normal people, want to give him the benefit of the doubt and want to give all these people the benefit of the doubt. And that has kind of allowed him to go really unchecked. And it's like when you see somebody who has, if you've ever had a person, like every person that I know that was in a relationship with a narcissistic person from the beginning has hated this guy because they just trip those wires. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately because he reminds me now, I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but he reminds me now of one of those people. And that pattern of breaking up with that person, almost 80% of the time, it ends up in violence. And I think if he's not checked in this moment, if he's not reined in, if he's not put in jail, he's not going to stop. And
well, okay, I get that. And by the way, I don't think he misunderestimates his power. But I think he still, in many ways, thinks of this as a reality show.
Yeah,
and so it's a fantasy in so many different ways. I mean, he lives in a fantasy land in a lot of different ways, and in some ways that's probably to his benefit because he can barge ahead and do stuff that other people could only fantasize about, whether you agree or disagree with him on a policy or this or. Get rid of the shower regulations and the toilet regs, and everybody's saying, "Give me a break." Is that what you really want to focus on? But in his fantasy, these are important things, I just think he is living in a fantasy land. But I'll tell you what, the problem, this is the dilemma in a democracy, and I think this is one of the biggest, for me, the biggest issues are the speech issues. You and I have talked before about the antitrust actions on Google and Yahoo and on Amazon and all that. And I for one, Facebook, don't support antitrust on the platforms, but I absolutely support it on Amazon, which has become horizontally and vertically integrated across the economy. And they're like an octopus. And I think we've talked about some of those issues. So now we have the situation, the reaction to Trump and all the issues you've talked about, in my opinion, is actually in some ways more damaging to the long-term democracy.
Totally
so Facebook, which is essentially a utility for many people, has cut him off. Twitter, which is a utility to millions of billions of people, they've cut him off. Instagram has cut him off. Amazon has cut off Parler and all the rest of these guys, won't let them use the platform. Well, if those companies did it in any other part of the world, the governments would be outraged. We would be outraged. We would decry the fact that they're censoring people, even if their views are unpopular, or they're censoring them because their views are antithetical to that particular government, which, of course, they all think they're legitimate. And so, to me, my big concern is the reaction to this. I hate to say it. He should not be cut off. I hate to say it. These platforms should not be censoring anyone. I just think that is a slippery slope. And, oh, by the way, now that they've started to do it, I'm all in favor of regulating the hell out of them. Because if they're going to be censors and if they're going to cut people off because they don't like their views, well, it's inciting a riot. Not all of his views are inciting a riot, even though most of them are. But he has a right to live in La La Land. And that's a problem.
I don't know about the regulation, but I will completely, wholly agree with you. And this was my argument with Alex Jones. Once you go into regulating political speech, you are going to own that, and it's going to end up destroying their business, and it's well on its way, which I'm not going to be sad if the social media companies die, even though I make my living on it. The psychology of the left is coming for you is so deeply ingrained in the MAGA movement. And the argument that you are going to stop terrorist events from being planned on your platform. Totally understand that you wouldn't want somebody planning insurrection in your home, but they haven't been doing that for 10 years. Those people have been on Signal and other encrypted devices for a long time.
Totally.
The
just like they are in other countries.
Right. The view after Wednesday was establishment Republicans here locally that were committed to Trump going, maybe I was wrong about this guy. But then the second they banned him, all those people went right back home and said, you know what, maybe they're right. They're coming for me. I'm next. They're going to memory hole me, Orwell. Like these companies thought that they were trying to stop something. And what they did is the Reichstag fire moment didn't work because Trump is incompetent on Wednesday. And then they went ahead and gave them their own Reichstag moment with the banning and Parler. Like, you're saying to the people who are, you should lock up insurrectionists, but the people that were just standing around waving Trump flags weren't the insurrectionists. And those people now are more likely to become insurrectionists because they have bought into the propaganda of Donald Trump.
Or check out.
Right.
And I don't think it's good they check out. And now, there's so many different waves of issues here. I mean, I think these people, by the way, these people who voted for Trump are half of the population of voters. So there's 7 or 8 million fewer than Biden. But when you get down to the numbers, it's almost every other person you meet voted for Trump. Every other person voted for Biden. So I think one of the big issues for society, and primarily now Biden, and the Democratic Party, is to figure these people out. Why is it that some very large percentage voted twice for Obama and then twice for Trump? There is a message in that about people's views of who they are and how the government treats them. And I think that's going to be the real big political question of the next, a decade or more. And Biden doesn't have a lot of space to play in that. And in some ways, he's the perfect guy. I find him, I must say, he looks decrepit. He sounds decrepit.
Decrepit, ineffectual, weak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of.
I don't think he's weak. I think he knows his mind. The big argument from so many of the Republicans I know is, well, he's okay, but Kamala Harris is really going to run him like a puppet. I really don't believe that, unless something happens to him, and I doubt she's going to make it happen to him.
This guy's run for office 4 times. His whole life has been about becoming president. Like, in many ways, and we should talk about Pence.
He knows what he wants to do.
He knows he's waited for this moment his entire life. And much like Mike Pence, who his entire ambition, which is greater than any other value he holds, has been to become president of the United States. And when Trump turned on him this week, now all of a sudden, go to Twitter and type in, quote, a source close to the vice president says, end quote, and look at all the different stories that are starting to leak out of Mike Pence's office. The long knives are out between those two, which is going to be fascinating. I mean, what do you make of Mike Pence and his actions over the past week?
Well, Pence is a creature of the establishment. I mean, he's bland and everything else.
Third in the House, governor,
ambition riven, as you describe him. I agree with you 100%. But he is absolutely a creature of the establishment. He is right of center. He's way too conservative for me personally and a lot of other people. But he's got to straddle that line, and I think he knows. He would be, I think Cruz and these guys, I think they're going to face a barrage when they start running again, and people are going to use the riots in the pictures against them in the primaries, and it's well earned. So I think Pence is doing everything he can to retain his position, and I think he hopes that Trump will further discredit himself once he's out. And of course, now that he has no platform, maybe Parler comes back, but that's not going to be 85 million people or 84 million people like he's got now on Twitter. And oh, by the way, Twitter is everybody. Twitter, the left and the right follow him, and the media follows him. But now they won't be able to do it, will they?
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking as you're talking, like, when you're criticizing, when someone is criticizing Trump, There was always but he hasn't done X, Y, and Z. Trump is good at not laying his cards on the table. I feel like the cards have been laid on the table now. It's obvious who he is and what he is, and you're either against that or you're for it. And what do you do with these Republicans who have known better than anybody else what was going? Nobody knows better than Mike Pence. Nobody knows better than some of these senators, Lindsey Graham, for instance, who have known, have enabled, have been sycophantic, and then now have had the change of heart after the cards were laid on the table. Does a Ted Cruz and a Hawley resign, or how do you deal with it?
Well, I think there's a difference between Hawley and Cruz and Graham and these others. Now, Mick Mulvaney was on the tube this morning, one of the Sunday shows, and he was asked, "Well, you said this isn't the Trump you know. Well, how do you know? And what's different?" And he mumbo jumboed but he made the case basically that when he was there, Trump for 2 years had a lot of people of contradictory points of view, which I happen to know is true on some things. My favorite law, the Jones Act, he had people on both sides of that. Least favorite law, but so he was saying those people are gone, and they're all whispering in his ear, and they're trying to make him happy, and so Hawley and Cruz are supposed to be big boys. And what I find interesting and fascinating is they have totally taken the focus off of the 120 some Republicans in the House side who voted to overturn the election. And maybe because in the House there's so many of them, and they've lost sight of what's moral and rational. The reality is people like our local congressman, in my opinion, who was one of the 6, Virginia congressmen who voted all together to blow the election off. I'm convinced, he's a good guy. He's done some great things. He straddled, right and center well. He's got a lot of federal workers, but he put his conscience and his morals in his right hip pocket. So as a defense, and he knew they would lose. He knew there was nothing there, and yet he gave voice to this, the conspiracy theorists. So in my opinion, he's got blood on his hands too, just like the rest.
That's been the fascinating to watch the Indiana delegation, because some of the surprising people that didn't participate, like the new Congresswoman Spartz, Bouchon didn't, Trey Hollingsworth, who've been fairly pro-Trump, and Todd Young, for instance, didn't participate and go along with it. But then there's Mike Braun, who's just malleable. Yeah. He's just a lunkhead. And then there's Jim Banks, who is a rising star, one of the people that when he was in the state Senate, I got along with very well, really have always respected Jim Banks, thought he was just a really decent and upstanding man. And then he has just gone full Trump this year as a calculation to, I think part of it is these people have so much trouble raising money in the Trump era now that they felt that if they did this, it would help with their fundraising, which is their real full-time job. And Banks is now just like, his reputation here is ruined. He's except with a certain segment, and maybe that'll probably will still get him elected in his district. Greg Pence only went along with Pennsylvania, Mike Pence's brother, and didn't go along with any of the others. Walorski went along with it, Jim Baird. But Banks has led that delegation, and I mean, to me, it's an unpardonable sin because it's just so nakedly like you just watch Banks and you just go, you only did this for fundraising. Like there's no conscience.
Right. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I think for most of these people, it will not hurt them, right? Because they're trying to defend against the right flank. And as you know, all of these districts have become much more conservative and concentrated, and only a handful of districts ever change. And so I personally think it's not going to hurt any of them. I wish it would. I do think it may hurt Hawley's ambitions and Cruz. And Cruz is so far out of fighting shape. He's He's put on weight. He's got this scraggly beard. It looks terrible. Hawley, that photo of him on the steps with the fist, that will be used against him forever.
There's a popular libertarian podcaster, radio host named Austin Peterson who ran against Hawley in the primary and lost. And there isn't like a week that goes by that I don't wish that AP had won. He would have been he would have been pro-Trump, but he would have not have been this, I don't think. I mean, it's just oof.
But so what is the permanent damage? I mean, we can speculate about the political damage and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's going to be random and erratic as to how the damage falls. But this is about the swamp. So what's the swamp doing in all this? Well, Pence is out of the swamp. So Pence followed his constitutional role. He did his job. And he sat on Trump's lap for 4 years, but, he's going to have to crawl back in the swamp with everybody else. The bleachers and the inaugural platform on the west front of the Capitol were climbed and damaged and all that. The crews are already out there, the swamp, fixing it up because people want, and we can call it typically the swamp in a derogatory way, but in reality, we're talking about what goes on to make life go ahead. And the inauguration is going to come off. The cops will be beefed up. Everybody, I think, will have learned their lesson. The FBI is monitoring the media because they may have cut Trump off, but they can't cut off millions and millions of these people. And as you say, they have other means of communicating. If they're the leadership, I don't believe, most of the people who were on the Hill were leaders. I think most of them are followers. It only takes a handful of leaders with the wrong point of view to lead you into the sinkhole. But the government is still functioning. Checks are going out. Yes, they made a mistake and sent them to the tax preparers, but somebody in the swamp caught that already. These are, as I have, we've talked about repeatedly, there are times when I'm glad the swamp is there and just does its job. And then there are days when I gnash my teeth and would like to drain the swamp. I mean, when you say these congressmen aren't going to face consequences, I'm kind of like, well, then don't the protesters have a point? Then don't the insurrectionists have a point? They do. They sort of do. It's this notion of breaking things and trying to fix them. And, I think history will say that on some things, Trump was right to try to break things. But where he will be judged a failure is on when you break the china, what are you going to set the table with? And he has a complete dearth of ideas that could be executed. And that's going to be the way they write it. And they'll write it as the guy who caused an insurrection at the Capitol.
I know. If he had not done this, if he had not gone down this route, he would have been the guy who got the vaccine out. Yeah. That would have been his legacy. I'm not sure he will get credit for that. I think there are a lot of mistakes the Democrats make. We may have talked about this last time. I think they should just give him credit. They were wringing their hands 6 and 9 months ago, saying there would be never you'd get a vaccine before the end of the year. Well, that's insane. And only if you cut corners and do things poorly and expose the population to death and disease and blah, 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 blah. And here they did it. And the only reason they got it done was because Trump insisted. And that's where a president can make a difference. Yeah.
Not pretty to watch with him, but you can.
This is now his legacy. I mean, Wednesday. Yeah. And I will say, if there's I doubt anyone listening to my voice is thinking of plotting an insurrection at the inauguration, but the danger of this cannot be understated for liberty because, these people are not for liberty. I mean, I don't think anyone's under the illusion that these people are trying to overthrow the government for libertarian purposes and peaceful anarchism at this point. And what could end up happening is, everybody over the summer in the libertarian world was going, well, the gun debate's over. Well, that'll be back on the table if more violence occurs. Encryption being broken permanently. The FBI has been trying to break encryption for a decade now. That'll be on the table. Like all the domestic spying program, which was on the ropes, will be revisited. You'll get a Patriot Act too.
Absolutely.
Like violence. The the consequences of violence are always counter to what the person committing violence wants. It cannot be understated.
Well, unless their point is more violence.
Unless they love it. One of the funny things that, Rob, in that interview, the two guys that went there yesterday, one of them goes, yeah, there were all these guys in tactical gear like screaming out orders to other people, and everybody was just looking at them like they were super weird and weren't following them. And I just I don't know if you've heard of live action role play, but with live rounds, like that's what it sounded like.
Totally. Well, so I'm going to show you a T-shirt, which you might enjoy.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Which I think my wife gave me, but which is the story of last year.
Yes.
I was sitting here thinking, if, of course, the year has begun on this note, but it's really the culmination of last year. And I guess in my mind, 2020 isn't over until January 20th, 2021, frankly, because the big story is politics, the election, and Zoom, and going, like this, and we, and it is now bureaucrats in a lot of states have screwed up the vaccine distribution. Here in Virginia, we're like 34th down the list of 50 states. And we got a doctor for a governor, and we have this. I think there's a double whammy going on. First of all, it turns out CDC doesn't want to release all the vaccine because they want to make sure there are enough for the double dose. And so you got the vaccine distribution in half. And then the states, at least here in Virginia, they don't want to, they're holding back half too, so that they can make sure they have the double dose. When if they were thinking about it as a matter of logistics, they would just keep shooting everybody up and expect that the second dose is going to arrive about the time the first dose is out of pocket. So they've taken 3/4 of the vaccine off the table by double counting. And I know there are other states just like this one.
Yeah, Indiana, I think, was in a similar boat. So why are they holding it back? Is it just what's the wisdom of that? I mean, just.
Well, I think they're not thinking through the logistics, nor is there sufficient communication, it sounds to me, between the federal government and the state governments. If I did not learn or had not read until I think yesterday that CDC and the others were holding back about half of the doses so that they could have enough to follow on the first round with the second shot. And Biden's whole plan, Biden says we're going to push it all out and you'll get a second shot in time. We'll get it to you. And I think that's the intelligent way to approach this. So
will it work without the booster? I thought there was like a very specific timeline.
It's interesting. It depends on the vaccine, but there is data that shows, I think it's the AstraZeneca one. Actually, the results are better with one dose than with two doses. So I think we're still learning on all this stuff. We're learning as it appears that the alternate strains are probably subject to this one too, and all that. But I do think it sounds to me like they really screwed up the logistics. I don't think it's the general so much. I think it's probably CDC and a policy decision. So, and of course, I'm hoping to get my shot, but I'm not old enough, which is ironic.
Darn it!
Darn.
Well,
I'm not old or sick enough.
Yeah, well, just hire a
at
makeup.
the age of 70.
Just hire a makeup person and hello, just like
right. Yeah. Well, I could probably cross down to Florida. Unfortunately, I don't own a condo down there anymore, but could have gone down there. They're shooting up anybody who arrives. So.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So
I haven't read that.
Yeah.
So I want to go back. I mean, looking ahead, there are two minds on what happens next. That this is the final gasp of Trumpism, and that this was the peak of the violence, and he'll fade into irrelevancy and obscurity. And then the other mind is that this is just the beginning. That Trumpism is not going away; it's going to completely change the Republican Party. And that there will be more violence, and that he's not going away. He'll become more powerful. I mean, when you look ahead, what do you see for Republicans and for the Trumpist movement?
Well, so I think that it's a great question, and everybody's trying to figure that out. And part of it goes right back to this week, what the Congress does. I know that everybody's talking about Trump's point of view, which is should he resign so he can avoid prosecution by Pence, waving the magic pardon. But on his Republican opponents, Cruz and Hawley and these other guys, anybody who wants to run should be voting for impeachment because that's the only way they can keep him from running.
Yeah.
For certainty. It may be that all of the events of this week end up keeping him from running, but I wouldn't bet on that, and I wouldn't bet on his fading away. And then the Democrats, I think, as much as I would love to see Trump taken off the table, maybe through impeachment or through the 25th Amendment, Pence getting a little spine and calling the remainder of the cabinet together and get half of them declare him unfit. I don't expect that to happen. And, I saw Colin Powell on TV the day before yesterday, and I saw Ben Sass on yesterday, and they asked Powell, shouldn't we be impeaching? Isn't that the important thing to do? And he said, he's going to be gone. Joe Biden needs space. He needs a clean slate. And if you make Trump the message, it's just going to screw up the beginning of his presidency. We need to look forward, not backwards, which I thought was, so he said he deserved it, but don't do it. And then Ben Sass, the reporter, says, don't you think that's the single most important thing, Donald Trump? And he said, no, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that there's a new administration and we need to move forward and end the past. And I think that's probably good advice. So I think the odds are he'll be impeached. The Senate will not. They may start it actually because Schumer will become majority leader on the 20th. Before that actually. Well, no, the 20th because they need Kamala Harris to vote for the Democrats, and he could pick up the cudgel at that point. But I just can't imagine, and particularly listening to Biden, that he wants it to happen. So my best bet is that Trump gets off scot-free, except for all the noise, goes back to Mar-a-Lago, where the residents who surround him are going to sue him for living there. And then he won't have the Twitter platform and the other means, but he will have people who are willing to write him checks and everything else so he can buy or build a network, and he'll do that. His kids are still running around. Don Jr. I think
Jared and Ivanka will just disappear. Eric and Don will. Yeah.
But I think people have short memories in politics, particularly voters. I know occasionally they don't, but generally they have pretty short memories. And I suspect the party is now largely the Trump party without all the histrionics. I think, unfortunately, we the party have become anti-immigration and anti everything, and pro border wall and sort of no policy positions that are based on anything rational. And so in my mind, the Republican Party has become the rhinos, Republican in name only. I'm one of those people who thinks Republicans respect institutions and conservative.
Well, baked into the heart of conservatism is the rule of law.
Yeah.
And that's the key here is the rule of law and respecting the law and its existence. And that's the hard part about Trump is, let's say you pass an impeachment bill that includes that he can't be president again. Him and his followers don't care what that says. He doesn't care about being a legal or illegal president. He's president. Right. And we're going to impose our will on you through violence. And that's where this becomes dangerous, is that you've got two constitutions out there running. That's when it becomes, there's the hopeful view that you've just outlined is sort of like the 1918 pandemic, where everybody acted so awful that once it was kind of over, everybody just said, I want to forget this period of my life. I don't want you to remind me about it. We're not even going to make art or music or films about any of this. Like 2 books were written about it at the time. Yeah. that maybe people, once this is kind of over on the 20th, just go, I just don't ever want to think about him again, But
I think they're going to be, I just think, you remember, they made the election about the rule of law.
Right.
That, well, they're not following their own laws. Well, that's not true. Well, they did something here and there unlawfully. Well, that's not true. So it's back and forth, charges of lawful, unlawful. And, the good things that could come out of the election, aside from Trump disappearing, would be, I think it's probably worth doing an electoral commission to once and for all look at the ballots and how the states do it. And the Constitution leaves it up to the states to do these things, but it doesn't mean there can't be a meeting of the minds about sort of what's best practice. And the important fact, most of them do follow best practice fairly carefully on the votes, and which includes having printed ballots even on the machines and not being online to the web, so you can't be hacked and things like that. So, but I think that would be important, and frankly, they need to put somebody who's from the Trump side on that commission. So they're covered on that too. So I think that would be a good thing. I don't think it would be good for them to pursue him. Merrick Garland, thank God they appointed Merrick. Merrick is he's a friend and known him probably 40 years. And,
really?
And yeah. And
I don't think we've talked about that. I didn't know that.
Oh, well, I was outraged at what Mitch McConnell did on Merrick. And, I was asked to write a check, a $10,000 check to McConnell a couple of years ago by Elaine, who I've known also for a long time. And I just could not stomach the idea. And what I said at the time was, I'd made a decision a long time ago only to give to Virginia politicians, because that's where I live, plenty of people giving at the national level. And number two, only to people who needed my money. And so, oh, great. Well, thanks, Bob. Click. That was, that kind of conversation. I could not give him a penny. And frankly, I'm probably not ever again going to vote for this Republican congressman here because of what he did today. But I think my case is unusual. I think most people will forget and rationalize. And I think a lot of these guys will pick up that Trump cudgel and just make life difficult. This is where the people in the middle, though, in the Senate can be really important. Lisa Murkowski and Manchin and Susan Collins and people like that. This is where they can really show their stripes. Romney, people like that can make the difference. They can move things from one side to the other side. And I think Schumer could show some comedy that's not comedy with a D.
Right. He'll do both.
Yeah. To the Republicans. The last time there was this sort of semi-power sharing arrangement, they got roughly equal numbers of senators on each committee. I think Pelosi is probably okay. There are a few congressmen that would go on the Republican side with her. The problem is the Senate, where you need 60, and I suspect if Schumer doesn't do some deal, then Mitchell will be a thorn in his side. But back to all this, people like Merrick Garland, I really doubt that he will see any sense in pursuing Trump like a wounded rabbit through the woods. I think they will be better off if they don't. Let him slink away and just go on with life and show some successes.
What about the state's attorneys generals, like the Cy Vances of the world?
I would have the same point of view about it. I would not vote for one of them again either. I think all of these people have exhibited a tremendous lack of moral courage and intelligence. There are some who believe what they say, but by and large, I don't believe most do.
My question is more, do you think Trump, so final Trump question, because I want to ask you about Garland, but, do you think that the attorney generals in New York or some of these places will pursue him legally And do you think that he will pardon himself? My gut says he's absolutely going to pardon himself, and he'll pardon anybody who was involved in the Capitol insurrection. He's gonna if you know, Stone and Manafort, those weren't controversial. He'll do Assange, he'll do Snowden, he'll do himself. He's going to leave with as much chaos as humanly possible. But do you think he pardons himself, and then do you think that he faces charges in the States?
I think it's possible that he will pardon himself. Possible, but frankly not likely. But, you know, it's a Hail Mary. Number two, on the states, I think the states, I would have the same point of view on the states. They would be better off to let him go and slink away, because wherever they pursue him, he will be the news, not Biden, not the new page, not the new year, not the future. It will be about Trump and the past, and not anything that comes out will change anyone's minds. It will all be seen as a witch hunt, and frankly, it is a witch hunt. You know, prosecutors have you know, the New York prosecutor is, you know, I think he's somewhat of an idiot. He's not quite as smart as his dad was. If he's smart, he'll just drop it. They just or do a settlement, offer Trump a settlement, so he admits guilt or whatever. You know, they need to make Trump go away. And he will not go away if he's in the news every day about a trial and being beaten up by these people that his supporters think are the bad guys now. Yeah,
the sooner you kill the victim mentality, the victimhood, the sooner that fever kind of breaks, I would imagine.
Yeah, I just think they got to let him go home. He's going to spend a lot of time stewing and figuring out how to make himself rich again. You know, I'd be willing to bet his net worth is down by 50%. Whatever it happened to have been, it's half of what it was. And he needs to deal with that.
But what about the argument that if you don't punish him for his crimes, if we continue to keep letting politicians off of the hook and they don't face consequences, then in the future, people will do this same thing in the future, but they'll be more effective at it?
I think, unless it's a clear-cut crime, it's really hard for people to accept that political punishment in politics. You know, the Romans had a rule basically for most of the empire that they did not execute their predecessors for crimes or anything like that, because they knew that was a way to, that was revenge, or it would be seen as revenge. Well, maybe it wasn't revenge. There is no question Trump incited that mob, that insurrectionist mob. I truly doubt he believed they would go break through the Congress and essentially carry the torches. But irrespective of that, it's like crying fire in a crowded theater. You can be arrested and jailed for that. So he deserves impeachment. He should resign, maybe. But in point of fact, it just does no good whatsoever other than to make the people who prosecute him feel good. 40% of the country will feel that it's a political vendetta, including people like me. I think they should just let him quietly go, just like Colin Powell said, and Ben Sass. Let him leave out the door. Close the door behind him. Don't let him back in. Remind people of what a bad actor he was. He will remind people of what a bad actor he was.
So tell us more about Merrick Garland. Who is he as a person? I mean, what is he like? How did you know each other? You know, what can we expect? I mean, he's got a big task in resetting the Justice Department after two administrations that really just kind of used it in a way that, you know, wasn't supposed to be used.
Well, Barr, I must say, Barr is going to have, I think he sort of, you know, at the end tried to clean up his act a little bit. And he, of course, has said he should be impeached and this and that. But I think Barr's big problem is that he had a fairly good reputation in circles in D.C. And there will be people still who will forgive and forget all that and say, well, he was just doing what he could, you know, to keep the Republic on the boat on an even keel while the president was manning the helm, and it was patriotic duty to save us. But reality is I think he'll have a harder time. We're not, I see Merrick about once every 10 years, probably. He used to date a woman who worked with my wife at McKinsey, and then he and she broke up, remained friends. We would see them, every so often, every other year or two or three, and dinner and exchange emails. And he married a wonderful woman, and the woman who he dated married a wonderful guy, and everybody's living happily ever after. And he is personally about as centrist a person and stable a person as you can imagine. He teaches, he tutors, has done it. He did his kids' soccer teams. He is genuinely a super smart and super nice guy. He's got great experience. He was on the Oklahoma bombing. He was the lead on that. He was the guy who got Timothy McVeigh, basically. He's got good civil rights background. He's got good terrorism background. He's been a very moderate jurist. This is why it's a shame he didn't make it to the Supreme Court. And this is why, people like that naked abuse of power that Mitchell did against him when he was nominated by Obama 10 and a half months before the election. So anyway, I think he'll be terrific.
Do you think that Garland
not
was
a bomb thrower?
Right. Do you think Garland was chosen over Doug Jones, the former Alabama senator, because of the domestic terrorist background? That maybe they feel that there's going to be, there's a pretty growing threat, according to everybody in cybersecurity, that domestic terrorism is going to go on the rise once we have Biden as. Do you think he was chosen for that background then?
I'm guessing that was important, but I think the bigger issue is when you look at Biden's cabinet choices altogether, by and large, they are people who he's known for a long time, who are well established, and none of them are bomb throwers. You think about the education portfolio, Randy Weingarten, and who's the head of the NEA. Everybody on the union side wanted her, but of course nobody anywhere else wanted her. But she's the equivalent of a bomb thrower in education. The bomb thrower because she wants a status quo, not to change things. She's against charter schools and this and that. And he chose a guy who ran the Philadelphia schools, who was on neither one side or the other. He implemented some of the reform things, and he supported traditional union teachers as well, and this and that. So I think Merrick fits nicely into the category of people that Biden has picked for his cabinet. When you look at that cabinet, they're all pretty gray, with a few exceptions. They're all largely wise, smart people, intelligent people. They are very centered for the most part. And they're just no bomb throwers in that group anywhere. And I think Doug Jones, I'm sure Biden had met him a couple times, but I know he knew Merrick because the videos of him at the White House and this and that in the ceremony. And
when he got picked, were you like, you see it on Twitter and you're like, holy cow. That's got to be a weird feeling.
Yes. And I sent a note to my wife and who was doing something else, and my daughter in Dallas, and my son in Australia, and they said, "Oh yes, I know you and Mom know him," and that kind of thing. So yes, it was just a yes with a fist and an exclamation point, and kind of like revenge in some ways, But
he was it was a very politically smart move from Obama to pick him because he was so unassuming and hard to be mad at, and there's nothing to pick on, and he seemed like a decent guy, and he was centrist, and probably Obama, I always felt, was just sitting in his office going, all right, let them wail and complain about this guy. Good luck. And they sure as heck did.
They did, absolutely. So anyway, so we're glad.
So we always end with a little dining guide to DC, and people one day hopefully this year we'll be able to make it to DC. Heck, everybody's showing up to DC. Let's say when you're in there at January 20th for one rally or another, where should people go eat?
I'm not sure anything is going to be open. I think that, the DC rules have been back and forth and back and forth. They had a 6 p.m. curfew the other day. And so I don't know if you can even do indoor dining. Actually, if I were there, I would miss a lot of restaurants. I saw a thing the other day that about restaurants that have permanently shut down. There's one called Penn Social that's in Pennsylvania. One of the best known restaurants for years is the Oval Room, right near the White House and across the street from Bombay Club. And I know Bombay Club is still open. And if you're down that area, it's a fabulous Indian, and probably it's not the kind of Indian you're necessarily used to. We tend to be used to more hot curry type. This is more the Raj, but it's by the same guy, Ashok Bajaj, who has an empire. Phillips Seafood's gone. That was there for a million years. Ann Cashin is one of the best known women chefs in DC, and she opened a restaurant, Johnny's Half Shell. That's closed. One of the another woman chef, Boundary Stone, is closed. That was made famous by the Obamas. They used to love that one. The best taqueria place in DC, El Centro, closed. It's just so. Right now, I'm bemoaning the loss of a lot of the restaurants. But if you're down near, again, I would say it's going to be hard to get anywhere near Capitol Hill. If you're anywhere in DC, though, I'd go to the waterfront. There are a bunch of great restaurants down on the waterfront of all price points. And I would say not only the area where I currently have a place in the Navy Yard, but also over at the area called the Wharf, which was redeveloped and lots of touristy type stuff. But there's some terrific restaurants. And you can't go wrong in either of these two areas, to be honest.
Is there anything like around Capitol Hill that's in walking distance that you just really enjoy?
There are.
Let's say I'm going to see, the Smithsonian or Capitol Hill or the Ford's Theater, like that kind of area.
You planning to go?
At some point I will. I mean, but
well,
I'm just thinking that I think if people, when people go to DC, they're kind of like right around that area, the White House, the mall, they want to walk and get a sandwich. I remember eating at some place and there was like all these senators in 2003. I was like, you were
probably at oh golly, what's the name of it? It's been there like 100 years.
Some like sandwich place.
Town. Yeah. It's Old Town. No, see, I don't typically go to sandwich places.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
I'm usually going out for dinner.
Right.
I make my own sandwiches. But a lot of what you see around the Hill is not high end, and the reason is that it has to be close enough for Senate Hill staffers to be able to walk there and grab a sandwich. A lot of them are bars, Hawk and Dove and all those things they're still there probably. So there are a lot of bars. There are a handful of very good ones on Pennsylvania Avenue up near the Capitol. One Spanish restaurant, I'm having a hard time. I can see it. It was very good. But generally, you're not going to find the fine dining within 3 or 4 blocks of Capitol Hill. And you could argue that's because a lot of these people are, the heart of America.
Yeah, right.
They don't want anything fancy.
Right. We want McDonald's. We want, Yeah,
well, they're not even many of those. That might be too upscale for parts of the Hill.
That's all these guys living. I mean, the Swamp documentary on HBO, like Matt Gaetz just living in the Capitol building, like that was a big thing when Todd Rokita was a guy that he's an attorney general of Indiana, state attorney general now, and participated in all the nonsense. But he and I, it's the first campaign I worked on. We'd known each other for a long time, and he got like, it was 2010, maybe 2012, when all those guys started living in their, now they have like a whole system, and they've kind of relaxed the rules against that. So, running over and getting quick pizza. All right, Rob, it's been great.
There are a lot of new restaurants, by the way. Next time we talk, I'll give you a list.
Yeah, all right. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot. There's so much. I'm glad we got it all in on time, and thank you so much for talking. It's been great.
Happy New Year.
All right. Thank you so much for listening today. I want to thank my co-host, Rob Quartel, for joining me. If you enjoyed the conversation, then please share it with a friend and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We will see you again next week.